Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. You're very welcome to this panel on translation and technology. And horse and carriage is the tagline. Let me just pass that down there. Thank you. We have had Jaap giving the keynote speech, and he's staying with us on the panel to take some of your questions a little bit later. And we have three new contributors to the panel this morning. So I'll introduce them to you very briefly. We have Sabrina GIRLETTI from the University of Geneva in Switzerland. So she's a research and teaching assistant in the translation technology department there. We have Péter LEPAHIN from Hunnect, which is a Hungary-based LSP, and he's the general director there. And to my left here, we have Andrea STEVENS, who's the Translation and Quality Manager for SDL's Machine Translation Group. So each of our speakers will take about 15 minutes to give you their thoughts and ideas on what kind of new skills and new attitudes we might need with the technology revolution that Jaap has just outlined for us in the keynote speech. So we'll keep our questions until the end, but there should be a poll open. We'll have about 2 polls during the session. So the first one should hopefully be appearing on Slido pretty soon. So if you maybe take a moment to answer the poll, and we'll have a couple of questions coming up for you to respond to as well during the panel. And of course, if you have your own questions that you'd like to ask any of the panel members, please contribute those during the panel session. And towards the end, of course, we'll open it up to the floor as well, in case anybody wants to ask a question from the floor. So without any further ado, I'm going to hand over to our first speaker, who is Sabrina.
Thank you. Yes, as Sharon was saying, my name is Sabrina GIRLETTI, and I'm a research and teaching assistant at Geneva's Faculty of Translation and Interpreting. And well, yesterday we talked about how language market is changing, how new professional profiles are in demand. And I would like to contribute to the discussion today from an academic perspective, me too. The purpose of my talk is to introduce the new master program that our faculty has designed in, let's say, in an effort to adapt to this changing landscape in the language industry. In order to do so, I will start by telling you about my experience as an MA graduate and translation technology consultant trainee. Well, actually, before moving, let's say, to the dark side of the academia, becoming a faculty member, I was a student in the same faculty. I graduated last year in August with a master in translation, specialization in translation technologies, which is also part of the European Master in Translation Network. I chose this specialization, translation technologies, after taking a module about CAP tools and actually discovering how interested I was in learning more about how translators could benefit from technology. I definitely wanted to know more about things like machine translation, localization, and this specialization allowed me to do so. Also, as a student, what I have really appreciated is the way our faculty maintains a link with the job market, offering numerous internships to its students. And this is especially true for the Department of Translation Technology, where I graduated from and where I'm working now. In fact, the majority of master dissertation from our department is written in the context of an internship. Here you can see some examples. Oh, okay, they're here. Main topics here are evaluation of statistical machine translation, speech recognition, and well, these internships are a first crucial opportunity for the students to gain useful experience. The last one is my master dissertation. And let's say, just just like the other ones, is one of those industry, academia, fine-tuning examples. I underwent an internship for a Swiss company who produces business management software, and that was interested in implementing machine translation and the workflow of their in-house translators in order to enhance their productivity. And the company asked our department to carry out a feasibility study and a productivity test. And I, as an intern, was appointed to fulfill these tests. And well, of course, I was guided by two academics, but I was also responsible for the project from beginning to end. And I had the chance to apply what I had learned during the courses, like in a real case scenario. So like evaluating machine translation software output, select and test the engine with the resources I selected. And I also faced the challenge of dealing with translators' reluctance towards machine translation. So from my point of view, it was an incredibly educational experience. And also afterwards, I had the chance to get in touch with other companies who were interested in what I did in conducting similar tests, such as Swiss Post, with which I'm collaborating now, in a team of colleagues from my department, in a similar project testing the implementation of machine translation and the workflow of their language services. So well, even if I graduated in a master in translation, from a master in translation, this internship focused on my technological competence. The same for my peers in the examples I'm just showing you. And in the last few years, our department has been asked for these kinds of profiles directly from the companies and organizations it is in contact with. That is also why the department and therefore the faculty has started rethinking its entire academic offering to better respond to these requests. And starting from September 2017, our faculty has a master, still has a master in conference interpreting, master program in translation with 3 main curricula: specialized translation, you can see this, translation and specialized multilingual communication, and translation and technologies, which is one I graduated from. And actually, the acronyms you see here are for the French names. So, and maîtrise en traduction spécialisée, maîtrise en traduction et communication multilingue spécialisée, et maîtrise en traduction et technologie. And besides this, we have this new master in multilingual communication technology, or maîtrise en traitement informatique multilingue, MATIM, which is technology-oriented and translation-independent, as it does not include any translation courses. And its aim is to train these new professional profiles that are related to translation, but that are no translators in the strict sense. Well, who is this master intended for? You can have two perspectives. The first one for experienced graduate translators who wants to keep up to date with translation technology, acquire new competences that are useful in their profession too. Or for students coming directly from a bachelor in any field relevant to multilingual language processing, such as communication, linguistics, computational linguistics, informatics. And of course, people who are multilingual. Courses are taught in English and French, so we require a C1 and B2 level for these languages, respectively. And, well, any other first languages welcome. For instance, the people who have been accepted this year have also Spanish, Arabic, and Russian as a first language. Here you have the list of the courses. There are 8 required courses. Then the student chooses among 5 courses among a list of required electives, and 5 more courses among those offered by the University of Geneva. Most of the courses are shared with the Master in Translation, specialization in translation technology, except for web and multimedia technology and information and communication technology, which are exclusive for the specialization and will be given for the first time next semester and next year, respectively. And all of these courses combine theory and practice. Some of them really focus on practice. And I would like to give you some insight now into what we do. I just keep, well, picture examples otherwise. The localization course given by Lucia Morado Vasquez. Well, this class combines lectures with hands-on sessions and practical labs where real-life working situations are recreated. And the course is conceived to give students an overview of the roles and activities involved in a localization project. And every week, the students submit a small localization project about a topic and receive individual feedback. And we have two final projects. The first one consists of perfectly localizing a software product, as well as preparing an invoice and localization report. And the second one consists of creating a multilingual professional website, which could be also reused afterwards as personal business website. And so some skills acquired. Well, students learn how to use a wide range of software in localization, how to deal with different file formats. Students are given the tools to literally develop their own problem-solving techniques. Most importantly, they got real hands-on experience. Another example, the terminography course given by Donatella Pulitano. And here, the final project is a real terminology assignment. At the beginning of the module, the students receive, this real terminology assignment, they receive the name of a real employer, which can be a company, a public administration office, or an organization, the name and the contact of a reference person from this employer, their domain of activity, and they need to prepare 20 terminological records by the end of the module. And, well, skills acquired. They really learn how being a terminologist means. They learn how to compile terminological records, how to manage time and resources in a terminology project, how to find the essence of new information in a limited time, and how to interact with domain experts, so how to ask them the right questions. And these skills are directly usable in the CV of the student, showing to the future employer that he or she is already familiar with these concepts. And this is also something I loved when I was a student, and I would like to stress now. It's the importance of learning by doing, of being concrete, learning through practice, not only theory, and at university too. I think this is what makes any master program worthwhile. And okay, moving on to job profiles. I just chose 4 of them. Of course, we could add some more to the list, for instance, the terminologist. So the project manager in localization in terminology, the localizer, the quality assurance expert, the translation technology expert or consultant, which could be both an in-house profile supporting translation team or an external profile, a consultant, helping businesses, helping individuals migrating towards new technologies in translation. And there are indeed language service providers who are offering this kind of consulting services, and a profile with these skills could be directly employable within these language service providers. Péter and Andrea will tell me if I'm wrong later. And okay, so we have already seen some specialized skills of the graduates. I would like to add some more, some general ones. Well, students learn how to develop, to carry out, how to evaluate multilingual projects, how to evaluate in translation technology, so new cut tools, machine translation engines, from a critical perspective, They learn about the potential, the limitations of machine translation. They know how to use it. Hopefully they will like it more. We have already talked about technical and problem-solving skills acquired, and also we aim to raise awareness of accessibility issues in our courses. So it's quite a broad range of skills in translation technology, and I will conclude on this. If we could represent all of these skills in a tool, in an image, which is not related to any country in particular, we would probably use a Swiss knife. And so that's all. Thank you. Oops.
Thank you very much, Sabrina. So we'll hand over directly now to Péter.
Okay, thank you very much, first of all, for having me here. And second, for technical reasons, I won't be using the remote. I will be using the force of the Jedi. I will simply nod with my head or say next slide, and we will move to the next slide. So the presentation is entitled CAT 2.0, in which CAT stands for curiosity, adaptability, and tech savviness as key skills in the modern translation industry. And yesterday we talked a lot about the curiosity and adaptability, but I hope that I can say something new, and we will talk about tech savviness too. Before jumping into the details, this is the last slide, so let's go back with a lot of left arrow buttons. The Jedi Force is not always 100% working. Yeah, like this. Okay. I was hoping that other people would also use Prezi, but I'm the only one. So yeah, just one sentence about myself. I work for a Hungarian LSP, which started out as a small family-owned business, and now it's the third largest player in the Hungarian translation market. And I hope that I contributed to this rise. So I'm representing the private sector, the LSP point of view here. And okay, so just before talking about curiosity, I'm outlining a short history like Jaap did. In my view, there were two major disruptions in terms of speed or productivity. Yesterday we still saw some members of the translator community who started out as paper and pen translators. So it was not that long ago that people were translating on paper, either with a typewriter or a pen. And when they started using a computer, a word processor, it was obviously a huge leap forward because the speed became much faster. They could easily correct their mistakes that they did by typing, so they didn't have to think twice about the sentence before starting to type it. And the second big disruption in terms of speed was the introduction of CAT software, obviously, because storing all the previous translations in translations memory is a huge thing, a boost in productivity. But today we don't live only with CAT software. We can use a lot of different other different tools and resources. For example, we use online or offline terminology databases. We use online or offline corpora to look for longer expressions or terms that are hard to find in the dictionaries. We use MT, and we heard from Jaap. And we really see that the quality is now rising, even in language pairs that formerly were producing bad or worse quality MT. Now they are getting better, so we cannot live without it. Even the professionals are using and will use it more and more. But also we have QA tools, sometimes built inside the CAT software we use, sometimes as standalone products, and so on and so on. So today's translators are really using a lot of different resources to help their job. And this is a huge advantage for them, of course. But also it's a challenge because if you are not using all of the available technical resources, then you will be left behind. You will get too slow and lose to your competition. So today's LSPs and today's translation industry needs super productive translators. The expectations in terms of speed and productivity are rising, and that's why we need curious, adaptable, and tech-savvy translators, as I call them, CAT 2.0. Just a little side note, yesterday we talked about, in the wrap-up session, about hard skills and soft skills. Of course, it goes without saying that every translator has to be proficient in both the source and target language, so I won't talk about this, but I take it for granted. So let's jump to the first skill that I wanted to talk about, curiosity. On the top left you can see one of my favorite quotes: a specialist is a person who knows more and more about less and less until they know everything about nothing. So I think it's important to know that we talk about a lot about specialization, specialize, but if you specialize too much or you specialize to a too narrow field, maybe you will lose your jobs because that field is going to be maybe machine translated fully in 5 years. So you have to keep an open mind. For me, curiosity and open-mindedness is more or less the same thing, and it's a very important skill for modern translators. For me, translators are a bit like journalists. When you are a journalist, you don't have to be an expert in every subject matter that you write about. But when you start to write an article, you have to dig deep into that subject and learn about it on the go, maybe. And translators are also supposed to learn on the go. It's really a lifelong learning profession, and maybe it's a commonplace, but it has become even more so. Also, for LSPs, it's hard to find and track down subject matter experts in every little subject field or sub-subject field, because new startups are emerging every day, and they are doing things that no one did before, so we don't even know what the subject matter is. If you are translating Uber, is it tourism, is it IT, is it something else? You have to be prepared to jump into new subjects more than ever before. And also, I think we agree with Sabrina that when you finish translator training, you are not a finished translator. The university prepares you for the profession, but then it's really you need to learn in the whole career. It's a lifelong learning profession. So let me give you an example. Maybe 5 or 10 years ago, when we received an IT translation, we gave it to an IT translator, and that was the job of the project managers. But today, we really think about, okay, it's IT, but is it hardware? Is it some cloud-based application or a smartphone app, or is it IT marketing? So the traditional subject fields are disappearing, they are merging and dividing. So it's hard to determine what is a real subject matter expertise is. So we rather need self-made experts, people who learn on the go and who are ready to sometimes jump into unknown territories. Okay, the next one is adaptability. Yesterday, the two Ukrainian ladies have presented the chameleon as the new symbol of translators instead of the parrot. And I also chose the chameleon to symbolize them. In today's industry, you have to adapt to a lot of things. Changes to the industry itself. We used to call it translation industry. Now someone mentioned yesterday that we tend to call it language industry, because translation industry is not an exact denomination anymore. And all the CAT tools that you are using are changing. The TMS software, the translation management systems that you have to adapt to because your clients use it, they are changing very quickly. But also new roles are emerging, like post editors, 10 years ago, a lot of people didn't know what a post editor was or what post editing meant. Nowadays, at least in our industry, everyone knows what a post editor is, and the roles are changing. Maybe you won't be a translator if you study translation, but you will become a data analyst after you finish your training. So the industry is very quickly changing, and also there are very different client expectations. Let me give you an example. It's a Hungarian example, but I think it symbolizes the thing quite well. If you translate for the two main tech giants, Google and Microsoft, into Hungarian, you have to use very different terms for the very same terms in English. Because one of them prefers the Anglicisms, which are more or less the same as the English word, just sometimes with a Hungarian orthography. And the other one prefers the real Hungarian word, even if it's not really used by the IT guys. So even if you are specialized in a subject, you have to adapt to very different client requirements in the same market. Okay, and the third skill that I wanted to talk about is tech savviness. Well, my parents' generation are a generation where people are afraid of the computer, afraid of unknown buttons, let it be the keyboard keys or soft keys in a software. They were afraid to touch any button that they didn't know. In my generation, we were forced to learn software by ourselves because we didn't have teachers for them. The teachers didn't know the software we were using. I had to learn CAD software by myself. And nowadays, it's also very, very true because even if academia teaches you some of the basics, but the whole industry is changing so quickly that in 2 years, maybe you will have to learn new software and new things. So you have to watch YouTube videos and online support files and whatsoever. As we talked about this yesterday, university cannot prepare you for all of the things that await you in the professional life. You really have to be a self-learner. And also, I would like to underline that it's not only true to the IT. I brought some IT examples here. But even life science and legal translators or translators for the European Commission or other institutions have to be tech-savvy because they can sometimes come across files full of tags or XML files or codes even without context. So it can happen to anyone, not only IT translators. I would like to add an interesting piece of information. Recently, Slater.com, an industry news website, organized a poll about CAD software. And it came out that more than a quarter of translators use 4 or more CAD tools, which is interesting because ideally, in an ideal world, everyone would have one favorite CAD tool and would be using their own one favorite CAD tool. But this shows that the different clients are having very different requirements, and if you are a freelancer, you have to adapt to the client needs and not use your own methods. So what are the takeaways? If there is one takeaway from my presentation, which was much said before, I would say that specialization is important. I'm not saying that specialists will disappear, but you don't have to be too narrowly specialized, a subject matter expert only of one thing, because you can lose opportunities. You have to stay open-minded, stay curious, adaptable, and tech-savvy, and then you can keep up with the industry. So basically that was my presentation, and I know the time for questions is not now, but at the end of the panel. Still, I would like to have one question to you, and think about it. Maybe we can have it on the screen. My question is it easier to to learn a new language, because they always say learn a lot of languages and then you will have a lot of jobs. Is it easier to learn a new language and stay within the same subject matter expertise? Or is it easier to add the new subject matter expertise to your main language? I leave this question open and pass on the mic to the next presenter. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you all for responding to our polls, both of which are closed now. Just to take a little note of that, will translators only use machine translation in the future? Majority of you think that no, they will not. Will translators be revisers only in the future? The majority of you also think no, that you will not just be revisers into the future. So we have some more questions appearing on the screen here, which you can respond to and think about Péter's question. And I'll hand over now to Andrea.
Thank you. Yes, this is working yet. Thank you. So unfortunately, I have to do my own slides. You know, having a microphone and the slide thing is probably enough technology for me for the day. So I also, as many of you probably know, I work for SDL, so I also represent the language service industry side. I'm going to be a bit more specific, though. I mean, many of you will probably, you know, work with Charter Studio, so you have, you know SDL from that side. But I work on the MT technology side, so my presentation today will also focus very much on machine translation and on the new skills and the new profiles that we believe are driven by machine translation. So very quickly, it is all about translators and technology this morning, how the work of translators is changing, what is the interaction of translators with technology, how can we support it in terms of training from an LSP side, but also in terms of training from a university side. We've heard a lot of this already, but I think it will be interesting to go into it a little bit more. So in terms of translators in technology, the work of translators is, especially that of technical translators, is changing quite radically, has changed quite radically over the recent years. And of course, it is still changing. And one of the main drivers, as Jaap also said, for that change is machine translation. Of course, the use of machine translation has been fairly controversial in the past. To a degree, I would say it probably still is. But of course, in terms of what translators need to do, translators need to adapt to the changing requirements that come with automation. And in our view, one of those requirements really is post-editing. That is a must, and we see it as an essential part of the translator profile today. What we also need to bear in mind is that machine translation continues to improve, and with improving, it will also, you know, the reach of the technology will actually also extend, as I'm going to show you in just a little bit. You may have seen this slide. It's quite similar to one of Jaap has. I'm sort of not going to focus on it. It just shows how machine translation has been developing over the years. And now, of course, with the advent of neural machine translation, I think, you know, that will give a real boost to post-editing because the output is going to be better and it will make the post-editing experience so much better as well. Now, what does it mean for translators? Of course, you know, we've gone through a whole cycle. We've done CAT tools, but with the improvements in machine translation that we've seen over sort of the last 10 to 15 years, what I would really say is that MT has become a completely viable option for the translation services industry, and post-editing has become an alternative to translation. And now with Neural MT, that will expand even more. This is what I was alluding to earlier in terms of the reach of MT expanding. We see a lot of growth in domains that have not been naturally associated with machine translation. So on the left of this slide, you can basically see the domains where MT is already widely used. You've got automotive, of course, manufacturing, technology, IT, and also travel and leisure. The interesting bit is the bit to the right, which, you know, where you can see that MT is now starting to touch a lot more domains, a lot more segments, possibly even what you would call the premium segment. So one area where we have seen a lot of growth, actually, where we're already seeing the changes, is life sciences. It is a big growth domain for machine translation. Our life sciences clients do not want to be left out of the MT cycle, but of course there's also an additional focus there for artificial intelligence and machine learning in general. Finance, financial services is another growth domain. There's a particular focus on security, obviously, to safeguard sensitive information. When we come to the retail and consumer segment, what we see there is new content types that can be done with MT. So let's say buyer reviews or marketing materials in that respect. Now I've included government and defense in that list. It's already actually a very active MT domain, but there is still space for further growth, which of course also a very high focus on security. So, how is the work changing then for translators? And I think one thing to establish first is some common ground, some common understanding. So we feel that there will always be a need for skilled and knowledgeable subject matter experts. We've heard quite a lot already about subject matter experts yesterday, and I think for MT, this is, this is just a given, actually. We don't think that technology is reducing the role of translators, but I think what we can probably all agree on is that it is changing it, right? So in our opinion, MT creates a host of new opportunities for translators, and it also gives rise to new linguistic profiles. So in terms, of course, in this context, when we look at the technology, right, new technologies actually do a lot for translators. They're not just available to translators, as a tool to use, but I think a lot of them actively actually work for translators. You've got adaptive MT, something, that was mentioned earlier this morning, where the post editor actually trains the MT engine on the fly. You've got neural MT with all the associated quality improvements, which will make post-editing the output easier. And then, of course, the development doesn't stop in terms of catch-alls. They're constantly updated, they're constantly developed, there are new QA checking mechanisms, improved TM leveraging, that kind of thing. Now, to sort of handle all those technologies, all those tools efficiently and to work well with them, we really need sort of a skill set that is driven by machine translation. And I think, Peter, you alluded to that already, you mentioned that already. So this is by no means an exhaustive list. It's just some pointers as to what, we see as a skill set that is needed. So I think we need to apply linguistics, language translation in the context of MT. MT is a hugely valuable resource in the translation process, and translators, post-editors really need to try and understand how it works. Of course, post-editing itself is a huge part of that skill set, but it's not only post-editing. Other skills are reviewing post-edited translations, which is quite different to reviewing human translations because you have to take the whole post-editing process into account. You have to have that at the back of your mind. And also MT evaluations, something that Sabrina mentioned as well. It's really important, I think, especially for post-editors, to keep up with developments in the MT space. You have to have an understanding of different MT systems, of different outputs, why different technologies actually generate different output patterns. So if you work with those output patterns, it is, really useful to understand where they come from. And it is also useful in terms of when you want to give feedback on the output. And then we come, I think, to the most important skill, something that Péter has mentioned, Jaap has mentioned, we talked about it yesterday, whether you call it adaptability, flexibility, or I've called it agility. This is what we're after. We're after people, who have a very open mind, who can sort of take these technologies, run with them, learn to use them, and sort of are open-minded to what the future in terms of technology brings. So coming to the new linguistic profiles, with all those new and innovative technologies, we've actually seen we know that further specialization is needed. I know we can't all be specialists for everything, but this is sort of from our practical experience what we are looking for. So we think there are going to be two profiles in particular that will help answer sort of the need for skilled and specialist resources in the MT domain. Now, the first one, we've talked about it. It's an MT post editor and evaluator. So I want to go a little bit more into the specifics of what they do, what they're expected to do. First of all, they're of course expected to understand different MT systems, different post-editing levels, and also use cases. Use cases can be FAUT, the fully automated useful translation, raw output basically. It can be full post-editing, which is comparable to human translation. They also need to perform testing. That requires a lot of flexibility. There are, of course, different testing platforms, different testing methodologies. They vary per use case. They vary, per LSP, per work giver. So it is something that you sort of need to get into and try and start to work with. MT evaluators in particular need to assess, they need to score the output, they need to compare MT outputs. So sometimes MT outputs can be very similar. So if you sort of, need to advise which one is the better one, you have to have a firm grounding, you have to have an understanding to actually be able to make that recommendation. And of course, you also have to be able to quite clearly articulate what, why one output is better than the other. I think one point during the breakout session was mentioned yesterday that translators need to translate or also post-edit to different levels, right? So the level of quality required is always what the client wants. So you can either, in terms of post-editing, obviously, post-edit to a full publishable level. You might have to do light post-editing or even different levels of light post-editing, depending on what is agreed with a client. So that requires a lot of flexibility because, I used to be a translator, you always want to deliver the perfect quality, but sometimes that is actually not what the client asks for or what is needed. And then, of course, post-editors and evaluators are very often asked to provide feedback on the output that the engine produces. So feedback is actually quite a difficult subject. Feedback is quite difficult to give because if you get the feedback of saying, well, the MT engine wasn't very good there, that is of course very valid, but is actually not terribly useful to act on it any further. So feedback should be specific, feedback should be concise, and it should be meaningful. So if you give meaningful feedback about, let's say, terminology or fluency of an output, then that is something that can be taken into account to further improve the output. And the second profile is what we have called an MT linguistic consultant. I know Sabrina talked about language consultants. Yesterday we talked a lot about consultants, and I'm going to throw another profile into the mix in this respect. So this is quite an advanced profile actually, and it's based very roughly on an in-house role that we have. I should mention it is not a computational linguist profile, it is more on the linguistic side than that. So let's just have a look at what is their role, what are they expected to do. So in terms of knowledge, they should really have excellent knowledge of translation, of post-editing, but also of machine translation systems. They need to provide linguistic expertise. They need to assess whether a project is suitable for machine translation, whether it is feasible to implement machine translation into a workflow. So they really have to look at linguistic point of view, but also at a process point of view. They also assess source suitability or look at specific content to see if it can be used for machine translation. What our MT linguistic consultants do is they devise and prepare machine translation testing, and that is actually a complete skill set in itself, because if you want to evaluate MT output, if you want to test it, your tests need to be representative, they need to be comparable, and they need to be meaningful. So it is a whole skill set in itself to devise MT testing. Of course, they're also asked to analyze machine translation test results. They do this for the languages they know, but also for languages they don't necessarily speak, because a lot of testing, at least in our case, is very automated and gives you pointers in terms of what to look for. So they will provide recommendations whether machine translation can be implemented into a process. If there are any problems, they will need to provide solutions as how to bypass those, what can be done. So it is a very advanced profile, but it is something we are looking for, and it encompasses, I think, what language services providers are looking for, in terms of people who are working with machine translation. Now, in terms of training and support, how can we support the development of those profiles? So there are things, of course, we do already from our side as a language service provider. We do this to support continuous development in terms of our internal translators, but also our supply chain. So we offer quite extensive freelancer trainings. These often take the shape of freelancer days in our in-country offices, where freelancers come in to learn more about MT developments, industry trends, industry insights, and so on. We share training materials. We also have training packages for prospective post-editors. Obviously, we have our own PE certification. There are others as well. So that is something that we also point translators to. We also have established links with universities already. So this is mostly done through our in-country offices again. We run internship programs. We offer access to certifications. We run workshops on machine translation and post-editing. And we're also supporting the creation of extended post-editing modules. So zooming in on sort of the activities that we do already with academic institutions. Our existing activities are, as I said, mainly post-editing workshops. Those are run for students and teaching staff because we want to encourage the inclusion of sort of MT and PE into the linguistic teaching. Our French office is also currently working on an extended post-editing module. They are developing this with the University of Marne-la-Vallée. I think this will be sort of a 12-hour course, which is going to be split over 3 sessions. We've noticed that there is a need for this, that there is a demand for this, so this is a really good first step. So how can we build on this further? We do know that students are curious about machine translation and post-editing. And we would like sort of to deepen our collaboration to make sure post-editing becomes an integral part of the curriculum. It also becomes a key part of professional development. And I think, we already run internships, but another option would be to explore internships more on the MT side maybe, or also internships focusing more on post-editing in addition to translation. Now, in terms of, the role that we see for academic institutions, for universities, and I have to say this is a little bit of a wish list from an industry point of view, from a language service provider point of view. We would like sort of language teaching, adopt a little bit more of a pragmatic approach towards translation and post-editing, to help students embrace new technologies. And, we've seen from Sabrina's presentation and already from yesterday that, good work is already being done there. So, I think the ground is already being laid for that. We also feel that machine translation and post-editing, with the importance it currently has in the industry, actually deserves quite a prominent place in language teaching in the translation curriculum. One way to do this would be to develop dedicated MT modules so that the concept can be introduced to all students and then they can decide whether they want to take that further. But, if they're interested, the offer is there. Obviously, expanding existing post-editor training to include the new profiles and the skill sets that we talked about is important. We also feel that unis, academia needs to get ready for cutting-edge technologies such as adaptive machine translation, neural machine translation. It will help put machine translation post-editing on the map. We really do think it is a key part of students' development. And of course, all this is made, I think, a lot easier by sharing sort of practical experiences, best practices as well. We as a company, we have like over 1,000 internal translators, post-editors, linguists, and they would be very happy to share sort of their experiences, what they have learned and their daily practice with a new generation of translators. Oops, that doesn't look quite right, does it? No, well, never mind. so, let's try and go back to see if it can come up again. Nope, still doesn't look right. That's a real shame because that was my conclusion. So I will try and remember what I was going to say. But we think that MT skills are, an absolute key part of sort of the translator role today. And by aligning language teaching with the new linguistic skills and the profiles that we've all talked about this morning, We think this will go a long way to future-proof the role of translators and also to increase their employability in a field that is really deeply interlinked with technology. So thank you very much for your attention this morning, and I really look forward to the panel discussion.
Thank you, Andrea, and all of our speakers. So we're going to open up for questions and discussion now. And there were a couple of questions earlier, I think addressed mostly to Jaap's keynote speech this morning. One of the first ones is actually a factual question that I might ask Jaap to address, if he doesn't mind, because not everybody in the room has perhaps come across zero-shot machine translation before. Could you explain what that is very, very briefly?
I already said in my presentation, if I could. But a little bit, it basically means that you can feed, it's the neural networks. They're so smart, you know, they're as smart as we are as human beings. You can feed them any data and they'll create something out of it. So you don't need, as with statistical engines, as most of you probably know, the previous generation, translation models, so bilingual files by text. You can feed it text data, language data in so as non-pairs, and you can also feed lip reading, facial expressions. All of these data can be fed into the computer, and it will create engines out of it. Let's leave it like that. It's magic. The point is, if you ask the people who built this, they also don't know. It's just a matter of finding the data, putting it into the system, and test the outcome. That's all we can do. And then do testing, and then see if we change the data input, if the results improve. That is basically the research we're doing.
For that. I think that gives us a good idea of what's happening there with zero shot, where anything and everything can be thrown into the mix, and it seems to work.
Yeah, as Péter said, you have to be curious, right? So Google it. You can learn it yourself, right? As I do.
Another question maybe that Jaap could address, possibly Péter and Andrea as well, that seems to be exercising people, and it comes up a lot when we talk to professional translators and about machine translation. What about confidential material? So how are companies, if you're promoting the use of machine translation, how are you ensuring that that information is kept confidential on behalf of the client? And how can a professional translator ensure that that is the case, that their material that the client hands over to them is not being in some way compromised through the use of a machine translation system?
Question for me. Well, first of all, I think you have to analyze that, just like you have to analyze everything. It's used as an excuse too often. Is it really true that this data is so sacred that it cannot be shared? Is it really true? Well, if it is, okay. If you analyze that already, but I tell you, in 9 out of 10 cases, people just say, no, I can't share. But you're doing it with your mobile phone. You tell Google exactly where you are every moment of the day, because otherwise they can't tell you how to get to where you want to go. So everyone is sharing. And you need to dive a little deeper and analyze that. But if you are absolutely sure that this is about data, there's a question there that cannot be shared, then there are ways to not share the data, of course. There are secure solutions, there are on-premise installations of machine translation that you could use. Your server could still be stolen from your office, but the cloud is sometimes safer, you know. Everything needs to be questioned. That's just my, you know, you need to dive deeper, analyze it, and then answer the questions. But there are solutions if you don't want to share data, or if you can't share. I shouldn't say if you don't want to share, if you can't share.
Thank you for that. Péter said something earlier that I'd like to come back to about specialising and not specialising, drawing interesting parallels between journalism and being a translator. So what you hinted at, I think, was that translators need to be trained, at least student translators need to be trained in how to do research, in how to learn quickly about a domain or a topic. So is that something that you would recommend having as part of a curriculum? How to be a researcher, how to become an expert overnight in a particular area?
Yes, absolutely. I completely agree with that. I think that in today's translator trainings, there is not too much talk about research, but it's an even more important part of the translation profession than before, because maybe 20 years ago or 30 years ago we only had books, and we had to go to the library to borrow them. But now it's so easy. It's all available, but you have to learn how to not only use Wikipedia for information, but dig a bit deeper into the subjects. And yes, as I said, some subject matter expertises can disappear or will disappear in a few years because machine translation will do an almost as good job as a human translator. So you have to stay open to new subject matter expertise, subject matters. And also, I would, if I could propose one thing, because I saw a question about differentiating quality, and someone asked, "Have you ever heard a surgeon say a good enough solution?"
I love that question, yes.
Yes, but I think quality differentiation, as we say in Hungarian, it doesn't come from the devil. It really exists. There are clients who are not wishing to receive a perfect quality without any additional commas or missing commas in the text. And coming back to the medicine example, maybe a surgeon won't say good enough, but imagine you are, I don't know, 70 years old, and you go to the doctor with a pain in your back, and they can say that, okay, there is an operation that costs 100,000 euros and will fix you, and but you can also take these pills until the rest of your life. So there's always different solutions for different pricing, of course. So high quality translation will remain part of the industry, but quality differentiation is present.
I had a different answer to that question, if I may. Surgery should always be high quality, of course, there's no question about it. But interestingly enough, surgeons use robots and are sometimes able to deliver a much better job, higher precision. They use technologies to the maximum. It's a huge industry. Part of your curiosity that Péter mentioned, read the papers, and you see that data and technology are invading not just the translation industry, but also surgery.
Perhaps we can open it up to the floor. Maybe there are some people, yeah. Okay, so this lady up here.
Yeah, thank you for the presentation. In the light of the current development that you have just presented, I may quote the, so to speak, professions: reviewer, quality evaluator, translation technology expert, quality assurance expert. In terms of remuneration for freelance translators, which is frequently based on weighting, match percentages, word prices, may this be a chance, the current development that you have just presented, a chance to go back to a reasonable remuneration scheme for freelance translators? And I deliberately call them translators because this is what most of us still are, I think. Yes, I would like to have your thoughts on that. Probably a question for Jaap and Andrea. Thank you.
Definitely. I think I said it just briefly in my presentation, the changes are so big right now in our industry that we propose to change titles. We see big changes in processes. I don't like the term title post-editor. There's a question about that too. So we propose that we adopt the title reviewer and trans creator. But also in terms of the remuneration, as everything becomes data-driven, there will be transparency about the effort that goes into a job, total transparency. I mentioned that we'll see changes in the payment models. And I think, I know it's been talked about so often over the years, but it's probably time to move to an hourly-based pricing. And there will be transparency about the effort that goes into the job. So, yes.
Sound is on? Okay, brilliant. So remuneration, freelancer remuneration is always really a difficult topic. In terms of, in terms of pricing, I think some things are already paid by the hour because you can't put a word rate on it. An example for this would be sort of light post editing in all its variations. Overall, I think it's very difficult to predict how this will go. I think it's a very general statement, and I know, as an LSP, I think it was Miguel who said yesterday, it's often a race to the bottom. There's a lot of price pressure from every side in terms of the language services industry. On the other hand, I was discussing this a bit with Sharon yesterday. We also have no interest in underpaying our post editors. We want to have resources who come and work with us again and again. So it really, how it's going to go, is anybody's guess. It's very difficult to pretend. But I think, there are some basic things there that we need to bear in mind.
Any other questions from the floor? Yes, please.
Yes, a naive questions for experts, if I may, which is this apparent paradox that machine translation is being used to manage innovation. The naive question I have is how machine translation, which is a very smart reuse tool, handle new concepts, inventions. This, is beyond me. Could you please give us some light?
Good question.
Yes, but I wonder if I understand the question. Are you suggesting that the machine hasn't seen anything like that before, so has no clue how to manage the terminology that perhaps is associated to this invention or innovation?
Or might actually fall back on previous solutions? That is all ideas. I don't know.
Yeah, I guess in that case, if it's so brand new, the machine has to learn from humans. The future that we see, as you see predicted in many articles in the press, is that we live together with the robots, with the machines, we help each other. So I see this totally in front of me, sort of we're cobots, right? And so we help each other. This is something that the computer doesn't understand that the human helps, and vice versa. The computer helps the human brain to the point ultimately where we become one.
I think if I can just add to that, of course, MT systems, whether they're statistical or neural, they're not humans, right? So they don't learn languages like humans do, but they are trained by humans. Of course, the difference with NMT, and Jaap, you'll obviously, Sharon, you'll know a lot more than this than me, but of course the difference is that neural MT looks at concepts, right, and context, rather, much more than statistical machine translation does. So, but Jaap is absolutely right, it is training by humans.
One question over here. Yeah.
Good morning, all. My name is Simonetta Buccellato. I'm a lawyer and I'm representing Lex Translate, a legal translation agency, so basically focused on legal translations. A tweet before asked whether translators will only become reviewers in the future. And however, I work in the legal translations field, which does not only entails the need to focus on content and interpretation, but also a precise and a specific style. So, for instance, we have a specific client who has asked for specific linguists for each job, besides a translator and a reviewer. So how would you cope with this request in the future? I mean, for a specific style which is requested by the client, considering that our field, I mean, the legal field is really different from others and requires a high quality professionalism and knowledge and expertise. Thank you.
First of all, I don't think that human translation will completely disappear. So what we are talking about here and yesterday, I think most people also said that the high-end or the high-quality translation segment will stay with us, the high-risk sectors and some subjects, but they get narrower. And it also depends on your agency when you are going to introduce some automated solutions for some smaller things. Maybe start off with just some projects and then change your attitude. So. What I wanted to add is that, for example, transcreation, that is a term we use for marketing translation, will also stay with us, and not only transcreation using MT, but without that. So let me give you an example. There is an automotive company which has the slogan "Das Auto" in German. Of course, if you translate it to any language, you will have the car. But in Hungarian, the slogan of that car company is not the car. It's something different. And of course, the translator who translated it wasn't paid for 2 words, rather an hour or 2 hours, I don't know. So there will always be some segments where, of course, humans will translate fully, or the human translation will be more important.
And excuse me, and if I may add something regarding confidentiality, that what we were talking before, especially in the legal sector, confidentiality is really, really important. And of course, like, imagine if you 2 companies are going to merge and there is a merging transaction. I mean, it's really, really important that data don't go out before the merge is executed. So, and we would face really important responsibilities if the data go out before. Thank you.
Okay, so we need to finish up quite quickly. So, Jaap, maybe if you...
Yeah, just, I mean, some further thoughts to that question. It comes down to segmenting the demand, and the market will figure it out. Your customer will ultimately decide whether he's willing to pay the premium for reasons of security and the specificity of the data that you're dealing with, or take a faster and lower cost solution when it's less confidential. So it's not like across the board legal translation cannot be done in the automated manner. There's a much more nuanced answer to all of these questions, I think.
Okay, thank you. I'm afraid we've run out of time. I'm sorry. If you have further questions, you might be able to talk to the panelists during the coffee break. Thank you for your participation, and please join me in thanking the presenters from this morning.